ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهدي الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولا مناوئ ولا منازع يحكم ما يريد يقضي ما يشاء لا معقب لحكمه ولا رد لقضائه وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم أرسله ربه بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله فبلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة فكشف الله به الأمة اللهم اجزه عنا وعن والدينا والإسلام والمسلمين خير ما جزيت به نبيا عن أمته ورسولا عن رسالته اللهم احشرنا في زمرته اللهم اجعلنا من أهل ملته نحيا عليها ونموت عليها ونبعث عليها إن شاء الله تحت لوائه يوم الدين اللهم آمين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. اللهم أحينا مسلمين وتوفنا مسلمين وألحقنا بالصالحين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. All praise is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one true God, the one and only. Whomsoever Allah Azza wa Jalla guides, no one can misguide, and whomsoever Allah leaves astray, no one can show guidance. So Allah show us the direction, the right way, as-sirat al-mustaqim. Guide us to the straight path, bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. We testify that there is no God worthy of worship except Allah Ta'ala alone, and we testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the seal and the last of all the prophets and messengers. O Allah, shower your peace, blessings, and mercy upon the soul of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I remind myself, my brothers and sisters, of the best advice of taqwa to be always mindful and conscious upon the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and take that into consideration at all times. For Allah guide us the straight path, Allahumma ameen. My dear brothers and sisters, as we live in the month of Dhul Qa'dah and we are remembering a few incidents from the Islamic history. Last Jum'ah we talked about a great incident of Sulh al-Hudaybiyah where Muslims came from Medina to Mecca for the first time in years. And even though the incident looked very unfair to the Muslims, that they had to go back, not making their Umrah this year. That's the treaty they agreed on with Quraysh. They have to give back anybody who comes Muslim, accepting Islam, coming to Medina from Mecca, they have to return them. But if someone from Muslims goes to Mecca, the Meccans are not obliged. It's not binding for them to send them back, amongst many other conditions. The Prophet ﷺ accepted all the conditions because they agreed on peace, no war. No war, normal environment, Islam would spread like fire in the woods. And that's exactly what happened. Muslims in Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that's year 6 after Hijrah. Only 6 years after Hijrah. They were coming to Mecca 1400. The total number of the people coming to make Umrah, 1400 people. 1400 people. 4 years later, the Muslims were making Hajj with the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam for 130,000. 130,000 Muslims spread, Islam spread at times of peace. And that's what non-Muslims, or the enemies of Islam, don't want. They don't want to have peace. The minute you have peace, Islam makes sense to everybody. With another incident that happened several years later, several decades, actually several centuries later, 800 years ago, after the Crusaders came and took over all the Muslim lands, and then Salah ad-Din came and defeated them. Some 100 years later or so, another catastrophe of al-Maghul, al-Tatar. Those tribes, they were separated. They lived in the Gobi Desert in Central Asia, or the Far East actually, Mongolia nowadays. They are different tribes, قبائل متعددة, قطاع. Their job is highway robbers, gangsters. Genghis Khan managed to get them together, and he made a state out of them. He formed them into one body. And you can imagine those people, they don't have rules, they are just about killing and bloodshed and what have you. They swept everything in the face. From the Far East all the way to the borders of Egypt, nowadays Sinai. Over the course of many years, they swept in their face many huge including the Dawla al-Khwarizmiyya. Dawla al-Khwarizmiyya, the Khwarizmian dynasty or state, they were ruling over what's nowadays Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Iran, Azerbaijan, big parts of Pakistan, all the way to the borders of Arabia. That was the Dawla al-Khwarizmiyya. They swept them. The last king was Jalaluddin al-Khwarizmi. He fought back badly against them, but he ended up losing. They swept the Dawla al-Abbasiyya, ruling over Iraq nowadays, and big parts of the whole Sham or Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and parts of Turkey nowadays. They swept them. And every time they defeat a country or a city, they set fire on it for the most part. They kill everybody, including animals. They don't leave anybody alive. And they kill them in the worst way. At Dawla al-Khwarizmiyya, one of the leaders, because it was so bad, he sent one of the leaders of this dynasty, he sent his family to India for a safe place. And at Tatar, they killed them all on their way, except for 3 people from the family of that specific person. Only 3 people were taken captives. One of them was somebody by the name of Mahmud ibn Mamdud, later on to be called Sayfuddin Qutuz. And he was taken as a slave, all the way, sold in Halab, Aleppo, north of Syria. And then sold, ended up being in Damascus, Dimashq, Sham. And finally he ended up being in Egypt. Long story short, he was sold, his name Qutuz in his original language is Al-Kalb al-Sharis. He was a fierce dog. He was such a tough guy from young age. When he ended up being in Egypt, he served in the army. And long story short, he became the top military leader of the Mamlukis of this time. There were so many things going on in Egypt at this time. All of them are bad things. To summarize, 10 kings over the course of 10 years. 6 kings over the course of 10 years. Within 10 years, 6 different kings. The latest of them was Aymak, was killed, and then his wife, Shajar al-Dur, the queen, took over, and she was killed. And then the reign of Egypt, the kingdom of Egypt, or the leadership was given to their son, who was like 15 years old. 15 years old at that time is like 15-year-old at our time. Not that 15-year-old of the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This is somebody who grew up in the palace, not knowing much. And at this time, where the enemies are the borders of Egypt, they swept everything on their face over the course of so many years, killing all kinds of things. If you talk about what they have done, it's enough to quote Ibn al-Athir. Ibn al-Athir is a historian, Muslim historian, and he wrote a book from the beginning of the time all the way until the time he lived, which was during that time, and he was collecting, going year by year. Year 610, that's what happened. Year 611, major incidents that happened. He came to the year that the Tatar swept over the Muslim land, and he was hesitant to write down anything. For years, until he wrote finally, I was hesitant for years to write down the happenings of this year, what took place in this year. And he said, how come? كيف لمثلي أن يكتب نعي الإسلام? How come I write with my own hands the end of the Muslims? It looks like the end of Muslims. They killed 1 million people in the capital of Muslims, Baghdad at this time, Al-Khilafah al-Abbasiyya. They entered, they killed 1 million people at this time, which equals probably 10 million nowadays. And they swept everything, they destroyed everything in their face. 700,000 in Dimashq by itself, I think, somewhere in the Sham. That's what they do. Even people who agree to give them peace, yes, let's agree, they will kill them. To give one example, just for us to imagine, as Sultan al-Kamil Ayyubi, he was ruling over what's nowadays southeast part of Turkey, Diyarbakir. They got him and they literally cut his body into pieces, piece after piece, and giving him this to eat. They forced him to eat his own body until they killed him at the end. 3-year-old boy, his son, actually this is the son of Al-Mosul, the king of Al-Mosul in Iraq, they cut him into half. That happened. What we see with our eyes nowadays on TVs,
Much more than this has happened over the history. And so many incidents like that. Cutting heads, killing kids, opening bellies of women, pregnant, everything you could imagine. That's what they did. And we're not going to talk much about this. They wanted to psychologically defeat anybody who dared to just stand against them, creating a bubble. الجيش الذي لا يقهر, the undefeated army. This is who we are. And if you read, maybe this is your homework, go read the message that they sent to Qutuz. What happened in Egypt? Qutuz was the leader of the army, and now the king is a little boy, is a teenager. He doesn't have experience. So he took over the power, and he told all the Mamlukis, I'm not in competition with you. The reason I took over is we have an enemy that's about to attack. And the only way we could defeat back is kingdom. لا يتم ذلك إلا بملك. We have to have one body, and it's up to you. You can all follow me, or we can still fight. Muslims will all fight against each other. They managed to, come back to their senses, and yes, they accepted him as a leader. And he said, I am going to be the leader until we defeat them, and then it goes back to you. You choose whatever you like. He stood up and he reminded them of what they should do, coming back to our senses. We have been enjoying kingdom and everything, and we have palaces for years. Now it's time to defend the faith of Muslims and Islam and the people that we are ruling over. They all aligned with him, and it was tough. They had nothing, no finances. This was the time of Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, the great scholar. And he said, Imam Al-Izz, what should we do? I think the only way is to impose some taxes. We need to get money from everybody. And he said, yes, it's obligatory when the enemies are at the door of Muslims. It's obligatory every single Muslim to fight back in every possible way, every way possible, financially, physically. However, before you impose and collect taxes from Muslims, all the Mamlukis, all the leaders, over every town and city there was a leader. They have to sell everything. They have to pay everything just like everybody else. He said, that's fair. Makes sense. And he started with his own property. He started selling his own palaces and property, and such did all the leaders. And now all the Egyptians came together, and he started reminding them, this is the time that we stand up. We've seen what happened. At this time, we've seen what happened to all the people who fought against those people. That was the strongest army, or such they depicted themselves and they portrayed themselves. But this is a man who managed to say no at the time that everybody said yes. He was courageous enough and strong enough to stand up and say, I am for it. And actually, that's what he told in his inauguration speech to all the Mamlukis. We can continue to fight amongst each other, but I am going to fight with no one, with no Muslim. I'm going to fight that enemy. Anybody who wants to join me, they are welcome. If nobody is willing to join me, he said, سَأُقَاتِلُهُمْ بِنَفْسِي. I will go to fight against them by myself. And subhanAllah, he was true in what he's saying, that everybody, all of these people internally fighting against each other, they managed to get together and they started, collecting. And at this time, the enemy, they sent a message with 4 people to the Egyptians. They didn't even know who to talk to. At this time, Qutuz rose and he was the leader. He talked back to them. And if you read this message, it's such like a horrifying, threatening. We have never been defeated, and if you give us peace, those who fight us are always losing, something down this line. Qutuz, what he did, he said, this is my response. He killed the 4 messengers. He killed them. And he handed their necks on the doors of Cairo. And that's the clearest message of war for the enemies. They killed millions of Muslims and non-Muslims by this time. And he started marching forward. He got all the Muslims, the Mamlukis, everybody has their own people. This is in Sa'id, southern Egypt, this is there. Everybody has their own circle, their own bubbles. They got all of them together in a Salihiyya, eastern part of Sharqiyya nowadays, or Ismailiyya, around Canal, around the Suez area these days. And they started marching forward, going northeast towards Palestine, Gaza nowadays. The first battle, the first encounter with the enemy was in Gaza, on the land of Gaza. and Muslims, it was a small expedition or a small group of the Tatar and Mongolian groups. He defeated them easily. And now remnants of them fled up north. The central part of that was Sham, Syria. They sent to Damascus, all were defeated almost for the first time. And he managed to keep moving forward. Now they prepared big army marching south, and they both met in a place called Jالوt in Palestine, closer to Bisan nowadays. The two armies met. Qutuz prepared, and he reminded his people, this is a day that it's a life or death battle. We either live and we defend whoever is remaining from Islam. At this time, Damascus was still resisting. Other Muslim areas still resist, but they fall. They were on the grave of the enemy. They did fall, but they were still resisting. And you can imagine anybody who resists such a barbaric enemy, what would happen to them. Read about what they did. And it was the time that they met, it was the month of Ramadan, 25th of Ramadan, they met in Jالوt, and the plan was there, and the leader was Qutuz, al-Muslim, al-Qa'id, the Egyptian Muslim leader who came from Central Asia, and he managed to get the Muslims at this time. And as the army is moving from Egypt, all the Palestinians from all the towns and little villages, women, men, farmers, they joined. They saw the hope is there. Oh, we have one leader, we have one, we're all joined. They're all joined. He managed to get everybody together. And the plan was, Jالوt is like a valley surrounded by some mountains. He sent one small part of the army to meet with the enemy. So the Mongolian army, as they came forward, they thought this is the whole Muslim army, and they thought we can finish them in no time. The rest of the army, 2/3 of the army, were waiting around the hills and mountains. So the plan was, send this and give like a decoy or a bait, if you wish, for the enemies. When they think that they defeated their enemies, they start following them. The main thing was to get the whole enemy into the valley, so they will be under the grip of Muslim army, and the Muslim army will attack. And that's exactly what happened. And the thing is, subhanAllah, those army, it was sent, the leader of this was Babus, the leader of the army was another great man. Those are the great heroes. Those are the great role models, should be the role models for us. We barely know anything about them. Babus, with just a fraction of the army, was standing. You shouldn't make it clear for them that, once you come to attack us, we run away. It would be clear. No, they stood and they fought for hours just to convince the enemy that, yes, you are defeating us now. And then when they thought they defeat them, so because those people are very barbaric, they don't want to leave anybody alive. They followed them into the valley. And now the command came from Qutuz, who was there at the mountain, for the Muslims to, one group should go close their mouth where they entered, so we completely circled them. They circled them, and Muslims start finishing them. It wasn't easy. It continued for several hours afterwards, and that was the first time Muslims feeling, oh my God, I think we are defeating the undefeatable army. And these people, instead of fighting with arrogance and stuff, they are now fighting for their life. All their fighting was to create a gap so we can go back. And they managed, Muslims give them that. They managed to give them a gap, so they let a few of them flee. So they go back and they tell the leaders, Hulaku was still there, the major one. Khutbah, the leader of this army, was killed. His son was taken as a captive. The Muslims were feeling, subhanAllah, we could do it. And they marched forward to Bisan. This is where another bigger army came, and Muslims also. It was so bad, but Muslims won at the end. And in both of these, looks like the secret for that was, subhanAllah, it was produced or introduced in the Egyptian drama in our own way. We have a movie about that. It was a lady who was standing and saying it, but no, it was the leader himself, Qutuz, who was standing and saying, Wa Islam, Wa Islam, I'm standing for my Islam nowadays. Where is everybody? Wa Islam. Basically, that's the code that every time he calls it, everybody comes back. When they are about to get defeated, he is getting down himself taking off his helmet and all his, shield and gear for fighting and just fighting like that. And every time they would see him, they would all try to get their arrows towards him. And they managed more than once to kill his horse, not him. And he was asked later, how could you jeopardize yourself like that? And he was offered, somebody else offered him to take his horse. No, he said, no, I don't take your horse. Why do you have to fight without a horse? That was the kind of leader. This was the kind of system that would lead to the Nasr of Muslims. At times where not only one city or one country, as we have nowadays, was in a very bad shape and fighting alone. No, that was all of these countries mentioned about. They were totally taken over by those barbaric people. And subhanAllah, soon after that, the Mongolians accepted Islam. And now they are fighting with Muslims. When they mingled with them, after some massacres, as they were retreating, being defeated, all they could do is commit massacres, kill as many as you can. They made a massacre in Aleppo, Halab, and elsewhere. But finally, that was the turning point for Muslims. Muslims were in a very bad shape, even worse than what we have nowadays. But they managed to get together. They managed to come back to their senses. And it all began, subhanAllah, by Egyptians. It's the qadr of the Egyptians. And I take so much pride in being an Egyptian myself. For this beautiful country mentioned in the Quran, no matter how corrupt the leaders are, and we have corrupt leaders right now, not only Egypt, everywhere, but Muslims themselves, people themselves, will always come back together. It happened 100 years before that, at the hand of leaders. They were not Egyptians themselves. One, Salah ad-Din, came from Kur, he was from the Quds, but he came here and he managed to get the Muslims together, and everybody else followed. And then 100 years or so later, it was also Saif ad-Din Qutuz who came from the Central Asia and led the army to defeat those enemies who came from the Far East, from Mongolia. And inshallah, the final liberation of defeated Muslims and Muslims who are suffering right now, inshallah, will happen at the same recipe. With people, Muslims getting together, and hopefully, inshallah, with the same leadership of Egypt and defeating those enemies. It is possible, and it's a legitimate cause, and we are not calling for anything bad. We are just here remembering our history, because when we live 50 years, 60 years here, just at the lower part of it, we think, oh, this is our qadr. It's always been like that. We have to be defeated. No. Look at the history. Things that are worse than this that took place. And then Muslims would be resilient and stood up again. And it always happened by coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Coming back to the right thing. What did they do back? Oh, they killed all the Mongolians. They did the same thing. Nothing of that happened. Over the course of the Islamic history, all through, from the time of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when Allah gave him victory against his own enemy who killed him and his friends and took everything and did everything you could imagine. At the day of Fatih Makkah, what did he say? Addressing everybody, what do you think? Now, me being having the power over everybody, what do you think I'm going to do to you? And we all know what happened. All of you are free. Go, all of you are free. That's what he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's what Muslims did. They just liberated all of these countries from those barbaric people. Actually, those very people, they just accepted Islam themselves gradually over the course of years and many battles. But the thing is, the key is when Muslims get back together. With what we have nowadays, it's very similar to the situation that led to the defeat. Everybody has one part. This is my area. This is my territory. This is whatever. And then they were fighting with one another. Internal fights. That was the case. Actually, when Qutuz got the people of Egypt together, he sent to the people in Sham, the leaders, not the people, the leaders in Syria part, and he was telling them, you have two options now. Please ally with me, or stay neutral. And some of them, not all of them, some of the leaders, they were on the side of the Mongolians, unfortunately. And subhanAllah, history repeats itself. But all it takes is a few people who got faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, standing their grounds with their faith, fighting back, resisting, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them Nasr. And it all again happened at this part of the world, Palestine, and those soldiers and those strong people. SubhanAllah, it's a qadr from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in both cases, even the big encounters between Al-Haq wal-Batil, crusaders from the west coming to sweep the Muslim world, or Mongolians from the Far East part coming to do the same thing, they all ended up being there, or finishing there, or stopping there in Palestine. Looks like this is the color of the Palestinians. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them nasr at the end of the long. قل الله يا استغفر الله لكم استغفروه انه غفور رحيم.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين الآثمين، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله رب العالمين، أشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا محمد عبده ورسوله الأمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم آمين. Now the lessons again that we learn from this is, subhanAllah, we really need to look at the history. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam many stories for people like him, stories similar to his. He was going through takdeeb. They denying him, they calling him name, they starting campaign after campaign to demonize him and his call and his family and every action that he does. And Allah tells him, oh, you know what? This is what happened to such and such. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. I'm telling you all of these stories. Indeed, in all of these stories that Allah said in the Quran, mentioned in the Quran, there is a lesson to learn. There are lessons from the Qasas al-Anbiya and what happened to them, all the way to the stories that we read in history, because it all repeats. There's nothing like a new chapter, it all repeats. Surah al-Haq wal-Batil, it's a conflict between what's right and what's wrong, the truth and the falsehood. The truth led by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messengers and followers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the right believers, and the falsehood led by shaitan, and if the tactics are all the same. Whether it's by flights, F-16s and F-22 or whatever, or it's by swords back then. They all do the same thing and follow the same strategy of eradicating, no respect for whatever life that they have. It's just like they think in very selfish. This is our interest, this is what we do. And at the same time, Muslims, they get defeated only when they تذهب إليكم الصيغة ولا تنازعوا فتفشلوا وتذهب إليكم الصيغة. So Allah said, when you have internal fights and separations and divisions, you lose your power. You have to be patient. Stay together. ولا تنازعوا. Allah said, do not have these internal conflicts. Always الوحدة خير والفرقة شر. Always being united is good, and always being divided is shar, is evil. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite the hearts of Muslims and bring the Muslims together. Allahumma ameen ya rabbal alameen. Allahumma ighfir lana warhamna innaka antal ghafurur rahim. Allahumma tub alayna ya tawwab ya rahim. Allah, bring our hearts, the hearts of Muslims together, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, bring the hearts of Muslims together, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, unite Muslims, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, unite the people of Haqq, the people of truth, Ya Rabbal Alameen. اللهم انصرنا على من عادانا بقوتك يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصرنا على من عادانا اجمعين. والله Muslim zikr, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, use us for the best of this country, for the best of this world, for the best that pleases you, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Use us for the haqq, always, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Use us for the truth, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Make us always say the truth and stand for the truth and be on the side of truth. Make us always against the falsehood and the wrong and the things against your commands, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa sallu muslimina fi kulli makan. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
One more time.